The sun was slipping behind the Carolina pines, bleeding orange and gold into the dusty horizon. Ethan Parker slowed his old pickup truck and turned into the gravel lot of Murphy's Roadhouse, a weathered little bar that sat just off Route 57. It wasn't much to look at. Cracked neon sign, a jukebox older than most of the regulars, and a few creaky stools that probably had more stories than the people sitting on them. But to Ethan, it was perfect, quiet, ordinary. A place where a man could take a breath without explaining where he'd been or what he'd seen. He'd been home for exactly 8 days since returning from deployment overseas. 8 days of restless sleep, polite smiles, and too many people asking how it felt to be back. What he really needed was silence. The engine coughed as he parked. For a moment he just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at his own reflection in the windshield. The uniform on his passenger seat looked like it belonged to someone else. The patches, the medals, reminders of things he didn't talk about. He wasn't here to be a soldier tonight, just Ethan. When he finally stepped out, the night air wrapped around him, thick, humid, and still carrying the faint scent of rain that never quite came. He pushed open the door and the soft creak of old wood was drowned by the low hum of laughter and Johnny Cash echoing from the jukebox. Inside it felt like time had slowed down. A few old-timers were shooting pool, the clack of balls breaking the quiet rhythm of conversation. At the bar, a handful of locals nursed their drinks, eyes glued to a small TV playing muted baseball highlights. Ethan chose a corner booth near the back, close enough to watch the room, far enough to be left alone. He ordered a glass of water, though the bartender raised an eyebrow at that. He just smiled politely. He'd had enough liquor in his life to last him a while. As he sat, he found himself thinking of home. His mother's laugh. His little brother's voice over the phone when he said, "Can't wait to see you again." Simple things. Normal things. The kind he'd missed most, but peace never lasts long when the world's still testing you. And tonight, that test was about to walk right through the door. It started with the sound, heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. The door swung open, and a rush of cooler air followed 6 men in leather jackets, their laughter loud and reckless. They looked like a gang straight out of an old biker movie, jackets covered in faded patches, the smell of beer and smoke trailing behind them. Their leader, a broad man with a graying beard and sharp eyes, scanned the bar like he owned the place. The others followed his lead, ordering shots, clinking glasses, filling the quiet space with noise. Ethan didn't look up at first. He'd seen enough bluster in his life to know when to ignore it. But as fate often does, it wasn't going to let him stay invisible for long. From across the room, the bearded man stopped laughing. His eyes caught on Ethan's corner table. Something in his face changed, curiosity hardening into suspicion. He muttered something to the guy beside him who glanced over, then another, until all 6 of them were looking at Ethan. Their laughter faded. The air thickened. The jukebox song kept playing, but somehow it felt quieter, like even Johnny Cash knew what was coming. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes but didn't react. He'd seen that look before, the kind that judged before asking, the kind that decided who you were based on what you looked like. He took a slow sip of his water and looked out the window, pretending not to notice the shift in the air. But the tension had already settled in, and everyone in the room, even the bartender, might felt it. The bikers leaned closer to one another, whispering. The bearded leader's grin returned, but this time it carried something meaner beneath it. He slapped the counter, downed another shot, and began walking toward Ethan's table. The floorboards groaned under his boots. Each step carried a kind of confidence that only came from never being told no. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched the man approach, calm but alert, like a soldier trained to read every movement, every tone, every potential threat. The bar grew silent. The laughter, the pool game, the clinking glasses, all paused as the man stopped in front of Ethan's table. "Nice uniform," the biker said, voice rough as gravel. "Where'd you get it? Party store?" A few of his buddies snickered behind him. Ethan met his stare, steady, quiet, unflinching. "It's mine," he said simply. "Earned it." The man tilted his head, pretending to be impressed. "Earned it, huh? Funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers. None of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. You trying to win sympathy points, boy?" The chuckles behind him grew louder. Ethan stayed still, though his muscles tightened beneath his calm. I'm just here to have a quiet night, he said, not looking for trouble. The leader leaned in close enough for Ethan to smell the beer on his breath. You don't look like any soldier I know. You probably couldn't tell me the first thing about basic training. Ethan's jaw set, but his tone stayed even. Don't need to prove anything to you. That sentence, calm, deliberate, hit harder than a shout. The leader's smile vanished. His pride couldn't stand being dismissed. The room held its breath. Everyone knew what came next. The man took another step forward, his shadow falling across Ethan's table. You think you're better than us, huh? Wearing that uniform like you earned it? Ethan's voice didn't rise. I served 3 tours overseas. I've got nothing to prove to you. For a heartbeat, the bar froze. Even his own men seemed unsure now. But pride is a dangerous thing, and the man's ego wouldn't let go. Prove it, he sneered. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're just another liar hiding behind a story. Ethan's calm started to harden into steel. He looked at the man's friends, saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes. I don't owe you proof, he said slowly. But if you think starting something here is smart, think again. And with that, the line was drawn. The next few seconds would decide everything. The leader's grin returned, and cruel this time. You've got a smart mouth, he growled. Let's see if it's as quick as your fists, he lunged. And in that instant, everything changed. The moment the biker lunged, time seemed to slow. The sound of boots scraping against the floor, the gasp from somewhere behind the bar, the creak of the stool as Ethan pushed it back. Everything stretched thin and sharp. Ethan didn't think. He reacted. Training and instinct merged in one fluid motion. He sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist midair, and twisted, just enough to shift his balance. The biker's body spun with the force of his own momentum and slammed into the edge of the table. The bar went dead silent. The only sound was the biker's grunt of pain and the faint rattle of a glass tipping over. Ethan held his arm steady, not cruelly, not violently, just firmly. He looked down at the man, his voice calm but carrying the kind of authority that made even bystanders sit up straight. I told you not to start something you couldn't finish. The biker's friends froze, wide-eyed. One of them took half a step forward, then stopped, realizing they weren't looking at a man bluffing. They were looking at someone who'd been through real fights. You don't know who you're dealing with, Ethan said quietly. And believe me, you don't want to find out the hard way. The man struggled, face twisted in pain. Get off me! You're assaulting me! Ethan released him in one controlled motion. The biker stumbled back, clutching his wrist and glaring, humiliated. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the tension snapped. The other men rushed to their leader, their voices rising in a mix of anger and confusion. He's faking it, one said. He ain't no soldier. Call the cops. Let's see him prove it. Ethan didn't speak. He just stood there, steady, breathing slow. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room. The bartender frozen behind the counter, the regulars pretending to look away but unable to stop watching. You're gonna pay for that, the leader growled. Impersonating a soldier? That's a federal offense, buddy. He yanked out his phone and barked into it. Yeah, officer, we got some guy here pretending to be military. Just attacked me. The others nodded, emboldened by the call. The bartender shifted nervously. You better wait outside for them, he said quietly. Ethan didn't move. His voice was calm, controlled. They'll figure it out when they get here. Minutes passed like hours. The bikers whispered among themselves, feeding each other's anger. Outside, faint sirens began to wail, distant but closing fast. Ethan's pulse didn't quicken. He'd been through worse, firefights, raids, endless nights where danger was real. But this was the kind of battle that tested something deeper: patience, dignity, self-control. The sirens grew louder until blue and red light flooded the windows. The door swung open. 2 officers stepped in, one tall and square-shouldered, the other smaller, sharp-eyed, with a calm, assessing gaze. The tall one spoke first. We got a call about a disturbance. Somebody want to tell me what's going on? The biker leader was quick to jump in, pointing at Ethan. That guy assaulted me. He's wearing a uniform to fake being a soldier. Look at him. He doesn't even have boots on. The male officer turned his gaze to Ethan. Sir, is that true? Ethan shook his head slowly. No, sir. They confronted me because of this uniform. Their friend tried to grab me. I defended myself. The female officer stepped closer, scanning the room. Anyone see what happened? she asked, voice firm but level. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the bartender cleared his throat. I saw it. The biker went after him first. The soldier didn't start anything, just reacted. A murmur rippled through the bar. A few nods followed. Someone near the jukebox added, Yeah, that's right. He didn't do a thing until the guy lunged. The officers exchanged a glance. The male one turned back to Ethan. Do you have proof of your service? Ethan nodded toward the duffel bag near his chair. In there. You'll find my ID and uniform tags. The officer opened the bag and inspected the contents carefully. The patches, the rank, the name, but all there real and worn from use. He looked back up and gave a short nod. Everything checks out. The leader's jaw dropped. You're just going to take his word for it? He could have forged that. The female officer's eyes snapped to him. Enough. From what I can tell, you're the one who started this. You're lucky he's not pressing charges for assault. The words hit like a hammer. The leader's face flushed red. His pride crumbled in silence. The other bikers shifted awkwardly. One muttered, Come on, Hank, let's just go. But Hank, now we knew his name, just glared at Ethan, his voice low and bitter. You think this is over? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. The officers took notes, calm and methodical. The female officer nodded toward Ethan. Thank you for staying calm. We'll make sure this is documented properly. Ethan gave a respectful nod. Appreciate that, ma'am. The bikers backed toward the door, their earlier confidence drained away. Hank's glare lingered a moment longer before he turned and left, muttering curses under his breath. The officers followed, leaving the bar quiet once again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Glasses clinked. Someone put a new song on the jukebox, soft and slow, almost apologetic. Ethan sat back down. His water was still there, untouched, the ice long melted. He took a sip. The night was still, but inside something heavy lingered, not fear, not anger. Just a deep exhaustion. Around him people whispered, but this time their voices carried a different tone. Respect, maybe even guilt. He didn't look up. He didn't need validation. He'd handled it the way a real soldier should, with strength, restraint, and quiet honor. As he stood to leave, the bartender spoke softly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry that happened here. Ethan nodded once. Not your fault. He stepped outside into the cool night. The hum of crickets filled the silence the bar had left behind. Somewhere behind him, laughter started again, softer, uncertain, as life went back to normal. But for Ethan, the night had changed something. Not just in him, in everyone who'd seen what dignity looked like under pressure. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove away, the neon sign fading in his rearview mirror. He didn't look back. What he didn't know was that this night wasn't finished with him yet. It would come back to him in a way he didn't expect, not through anger or revenge, but something far more powerful. A choice. And that choice was waiting for him just a few days later. 3 days passed. The bar was behind him now, or at least that's what Ethan kept telling himself. He threw himself into routine, fixing things around the house, taking long drives through quiet back roads, anything to keep his mind from replaying the look in those men's eyes. But at night, when the world went still, the memory crept back. Not the anger, not the fear, just that hollow question that always came after moments like this. How many times would he have to prove himself before people stopped doubting who he was? It was late afternoon when it happened. The sound of gravel crunching outside pulled him from under the hood of his old truck. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing as a single motorcycle rolled into his driveway. He recognized it instantly. Same dull chrome, same rattling exhaust. The rider killed the engine and took off his helmet. It wasn't Hank. It was the quieter one, the thin man who'd stood near the back that night, who'd said nothing while everything went wrong. Ethan didn't move. Just watched him. The man hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other before finally stepping forward. Hey, he said, voice uncertain. You're Ethan, right? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Depends who's asking. The man nodded, looking down for a second. Name's Mike. We met, well, kinda met, at Murphy's Roadhouse. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Yeah, I remember. Mike ran a hand over his face, the kind of gesture that spoke of regret more than nerves. Look, I know I shouldn't be here, but I had to come. I owe you an apology. Ethan said nothing. He didn't trust words easily. Mike took a slow breath, the weight of silence pressing on him. What happened the other night, it wasn't right, none of it. I should have said something, but I didn't. I just stood there and I've been thinking about it ever since. Hank was way out of line. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the truck. And now you want to make it right? Yeah, Mike said quietly. I guess I do. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need to say it to your face. You didn't deserve what happened. We judged you before we even knew who you were. The man's voice cracked slightly at the end, like the words had been waiting too long to come out. Ethan studied him. The biker's jacket looked too big, his posture smaller somehow. Not out of fear, but shame. Why now? Ethan asked. You could have kept pretending it didn't happen. Mike looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Because it did happen. And I can't change that, but I can choose not to be part of it again. Ethan stayed quiet. He'd heard plenty of apologies in his life, some real, some just to ease the guilt of the person saying them. But this one sounded different. You been with that group long? Ethan asked. Mike shook his head. A few years. They helped me out after my brother passed. Guess I got caught up in it. Hank, he's not a bad guy deep down, but he's angry at the world. We all are in our own ways. But what he did, that wasn't about the world. That was about hate. The air between them felt heavy. Cicadas hummed in the distance. A storm was gathering somewhere behind the trees, low thunder rumbling far off. Ethan nodded slowly. Takes guts to show up here, you know. Mike let out a small nervous laugh. Yeah, my wife told me I was crazy. Said I'd get myself killed, but I had to do it anyway. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Crazy or not, he said. You did something most people wouldn't. You faced it. Mike looked at the ground. I don't expect you to forgive me. Ethan shook his head. Forgiveness isn't something people earn with words. It's something they start earning with actions. What you do after this, that's what matters. Mike nodded. Fair enough. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a patch worn and frayed around the edges. This was my brother's. He served too. I lost him overseas. I guess I forgot what that uniform really meant until the other night. Ethan looked at the patch in silence. The fabric was faded, but the insignia still shone faintly in the light. Keep it, Ethan said finally. You don't need to give that to me. Mike closed his hand around it, his eyes glistening. He was a good man. Would have respected you. I think he'd be disappointed in how I acted. I know I am. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. Ethan took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of rain and gasoline. You can't change the past, Mike, but you can change what kind of man you are tomorrow. Mike nodded, his throat tight. Thank you. For not throwing me off your property. Ethan almost laughed. You're not the first man to walk into my life with bad choices behind him. Probably won't be the last. Mike started toward his bike, then stopped. One more thing, he said. Hank's been talking. He's embarrassed, angry, but I think you got to him too. He won't admit it, but you did. He's been quieter since that night. Ethan didn't respond, but something softened in his expression. Mike climbed back on his bike and started the engine. The rumble filled the stillness as he turned down the road. Take care of yourself, soldier, he called over his shoulder. Ethan watched until the sound faded into the trees. Then he looked down at his hands, calloused, steady, and felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The world hadn't changed that night at the bar. But maybe a few hearts had. He went back to his truck, tightening a loose bolt with the same quiet focus he'd carried in battle. Every turn of the wrench felt like letting something go, a little bit of anger, a little bit of pain. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Ethan looked toward the horizon. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased, just enough for the weight of the past to lift. The world was still unfair, still harsh, but moments like this reminded him why he'd fought so hard to defend it. Not for medals, not for praise, but for the hope that even one person might choose to do better tomorrow than they did yesterday. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. He picked up his tools, the rain falling steady now, washing the dust off everything it touched. In the rhythm of the rain and the sound of thunder rolling away, there was peace. Peace hard-earned, but real. That night the storm came down in sheets. Rain hammered the roof while thunder rolled like distant artillery. Ethan sat by the window, watching lightning flash over the hills. and for a moment it almost felt like the world was trying to cleanse itself. He wasn't a man of many words, but silence had always been his truest language. Still, the quiet this time felt different, heavier, deeper. Mike's visit had stirred something inside him he hadn't let himself feel in years. Not anger, not bitterness, something softer. Hope, maybe, or the fragile start of it. He thought of Mike's trembling voice, the weight of that old patch in his palm. He thought of how hate could rot men from the inside, until all they saw in others were reflections of their own fear. And then he thought about Hank, the man who'd tried to humiliate him, the one too proud to see the damage in his own reflection. Ethan couldn't stop wondering what kind of man Hank had been before bitterness turned him mean. Was he someone's father? Someone's friend? He didn't know, but the question wouldn't leave him. 2 days later, he got an answer in a way he never expected. It was a quiet afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and shining. Ethan was sweeping the porch when a different sound reached his ears. A car this time, not a bike. He turned. A dusty blue sedan pulled into his driveway, engine sputtering like it was on its last breath. The driver's door opened and there stood Hank. Ethan's first instinct was to tense up. His body went rigid before his mind caught up. Hank looked rougher than before, less proud, more human. There was no smirk this time. No swagger. Just tired eyes under a worn baseball cap. He stood by the car door hesitant as though the air itself was a barrier. Ethan didn't speak first. He wasn't going to. Hank cleared his throat, voice gruff. Guess you didn't expect to see me here. No, Ethan said. Can't say I did. Mind if I say something? Ethan shrugged. That depends what you came to say. Hank looked down, kicked at a pebble. Fair. I deserve that. He took a slow step forward, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Look, I ain't good with words. Never have been. But I need to own up to what I did. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, watching him. The man who'd once towered with arrogance now looked smaller, humbled. I was wrong, Hank said. Plain and simple. I saw you sitting there and, I don't know, something in me snapped. I told myself you were faking, that you didn't earn that uniform. But the truth is, I wasn't looking at you. I was looking at me. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Ethan stayed silent, letting him speak. My boy, Hank went on, his voice cracking. He served too. Didn't come back. He swallowed hard. When I saw you, all I could think was how unfair it was that you did. It ain't right, but that's the truth. I hated what I didn't understand, and I took it out on you. For the first time, Ethan saw the man behind the anger. Not a bully. Not a bigot. Just someone crushed by loss, clinging to the only emotion that still made him feel alive. Rage. I'm sorry, Hank said. I don't expect you to forgive me. Hell, I don't even forgive myself most days. But I had to come. I had to look you in the eye and say it. Ethan took a long breath. Your son's name? Ryan, Hank said quietly. He was 23. Ethan nodded slowly. Then you should know something, Hank. The kind of man your son was, the kind of men we serve with, they'd never want you to carry hate like that. It doesn't honor him. It just keeps you chained to the worst parts of the past. Hank's eyes glistened. I know. The two men stood there in silence, the air thick but not tense. It was a different kind of quiet now, the kind that begins to heal instead of break. Finally, Ethan spoke again, softer. You came here to make peace? Hank nodded. Yeah, if you'll have it. Ethan stared for a long moment, then stepped down from the porch and extended his hand. Hank looked at it surprised before finally taking it. His grip was firm but trembling. They stood like that. The soldier and the man who once hated him, both too tired to keep carrying the same old weight. When they let go, something invisible seemed to lift between them. You still go to that bar? Ethan asked. Hank gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. Haven't been back since. Not much for drinking these days. Good, Ethan said. That place has enough ghosts. Hank nodded, glancing at the old truck in the driveway. You fix everything yourself? Most things, Ethan said. Some take longer than others. Hank smiled faintly. Yeah, I get that. He hesitated, then added, if you ever need a hand, I'm around. Not that you'd want it. Ethan looked him straight in the eye. I think we've both learned not to judge so fast. Hank's shoulders relaxed for the first time. Guess we have. As he turned to leave, Ethan called out, Hey. Hank stopped. You don't have to carry it alone, Ethan said. Your son's memory deserves better than that. Hank's throat worked as he nodded, his voice rough. Thank you. Really. The engine coughed to life and the old sedan rolled away, leaving only the echo of tires on gravel and a long silence in its wake. Ethan watched until the car disappeared over the hill. Then he sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out across the wet road. Somewhere inside, something shifted, a weight uncoiled like a knot finally loosening. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt human again. The world had a way of breaking people down, of testing who they were when no one was watching. But every now and then, life offered a small redemption, a chance to be better than yesterday. For Ethan, that was enough. He looked up at the fading sun, the sky glowing orange and calm, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe easy. Tomorrow would come as it always did. And when it did, he'd be ready to face it, not as a man defined by his uniform or by what others saw, but simply as himself. The days rolled by quietly after that, softer somehow. Morning sun slid through the blinds of Ethan's small house, painting the walls with light. He'd wake up early, pour himself a cup of coffee, and listen to the world wake with him. The silence that once felt like a reminder of loneliness now felt like peace earned the hard way. He still thought about that night sometimes. The sound of boots, the weight of stairs, the words thrown like knives, but they no longer burned. Now they were lessons carved into memory, not to harden him, but to teach him how to stay human in a world that too often forgot what that meant. Then one morning, about a week later, a knock came at his door. Ethan set down his mug, wiped his hands, and opened it. There stood Hank again, this time without the cap, without the bitterness. He looked uncertain, almost shy, holding something in his hand. Behind him stood Mike, that same quiet humility in his eyes. Ethan blinked, surprised but calm. Didn't expect company this early? Hank gave a nervous smile. Didn't expect to come either. But we wanted to see you. Ethan stepped aside. Come in. They entered the small living room, removing their jackets. It was a simple space. A few framed photos on the wall, a folded flag in a glass case, a worn couch that had seen better years. Hank stared at the flag for a long moment before speaking. That his? Ethan nodded. Yeah, a friend from my last tour. Didn't make it home, Hank swallowed hard. Reminds me of my boy. The room grew quiet again, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was heavy with understanding. Shared pain needed no explanation. Finally, Hank placed what he'd been holding on the table. A small box. Brought you something, he said. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a medal, scratched, tarnished, but still gleaming faintly in the light. My son's, Hank said softly. Ryan got it for saving a buddy's life in Afghanistan. He never made a big deal out of it. Just said, Dad, anyone would have done the same. Ethan looked at the medal, then at Hank. Why are you giving this to me? Because, Hank said, voice trembling. I think he'd have wanted you to have it. Because he'd have respected the man you are. And because maybe it's time I let go of holding on to things through anger. Ethan's chest tightened. He reached out, closing Hank's hand around the medal again. This belongs with you, and with him. You already honored him by coming here today. Hank's eyes glistened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Mike shifted slightly, looking down, his own voice quiet. He's right, Hank, your boy wouldn't want you stuck in the past. Neither would mine. Ethan looked between them. Two men who had once been enemies, now standing here trying to be better. It wasn't something he expected, but it was something he deeply understood. You know, he said after a moment, when I was overseas, I used to think the hardest battles were fought with guns. Turns out I was wrong. The real ones, the ones that matter, they're fought here. He tapped his chest, in the heart. None of them said anything for a while. The sound of a breeze through the open window filled the room, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Hank finally nodded. You taught me something that night, Ethan. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight back to prove anything. You just stood there calm. That kind of strength. That's what I want to find again. Ethan's eyes softened. You already did. You came back. A long silence settled between them. Not of tension, but of peace. Then slowly Hank smiled. Maybe next time we meet it'll be over coffee instead of chaos. Ethan chuckled lightly. I'll hold you to that. The men stood shaking hands once more, but this time there was no hesitation, no burden between them. Just the shared understanding of men who'd both been broken in their own ways and had chosen, finally, to heal. As they stepped out into the sunlight, the world felt brighter. The sky was open and clear, the same stretch of blue that soldiers looked up at halfway across the world. For the first time, it didn't feel distant. Hank and Mike climbed into the car, waving as they drove away down the dusty road. Ethan watched until they disappeared over the rise, then turned back toward his house. He paused for a moment, taking in the quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full of meaning. For the first time in years, he felt something new stirring deep inside him. Not pride, not relief. Peace. He picked up his coffee again and stepped out onto the porch, watching the breeze move through the trees. The world, he realized, would never be perfect. There would always be anger, always be judgment, always be someone ready to question what they didn't understand. But there would also be moments like this. Moments when people changed. When hate cracked open just enough to let light through. He'd seen darkness in places most people couldn't imagine. But he'd also seen something far more powerful. The courage it took for broken people to choose kindness again. He sat down, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought overseas or on battlefields. Sometimes they're fought right here, in small towns and quiet bars, in hearts that forgot how to trust. And when those battles are won even by one man's calm strength, the victory echoes far beyond what anyone can see. For Ethan Parker, that was enough. And as the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the road, he knew one simple truth. The world still had good in it. And he would always stand for it.